Welcome to the Workflow Podcast. If you enjoy this show, please like, share, and or subscribe. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the Workflow Podcast for episode 3 of season 2. We're talking all about how to optimize your mind and body to focus better at work. And today we're talking all about movement and how movement plays in the mind. So let's get right into this one. Nowadays, so many people are working from home. Our commute has essentially been reduced from the bedroom to the study to the kitchen table, maybe the local cafe. That's probably as far as most people get when working from home. But like most things in life, things are push and pull, pro and con. So while it might be incredibly convenient for a lot of people to work from home, it comes with myriad costs, whether they're social costs, emotional costs, productivity costs, and health costs. We might add a few extra kilos to our waistline, but our productivity, our focus, our cognition can really suffer if we're not doing anything to replace the shortfall in movement that was once a byproduct of, say, catching the train to work, walking from the train station to the office, walking around a big office, going out for lunch with your colleagues. All of those little movements throughout the day actually add up. And if we find ourselves barely leaving our house, our homes, that can have incredibly deleterious effects insofar as our emotional well-being and our focus is concerned. So let's look at how movement actually plays in the mind. When we move, our brain essentially sees that as a moment of fight or flight. Evolutionarily, tens of thousands of years ago, we didn't know when we were going to eat, and therefore our brain learned to conserve energy. But it also learned that when we moved, it probably meant that we were looking to catch some prey, maybe we were foraging, or maybe we were looking to evade predators. So it's a moment of fight or flight. Cortisol is released, but so is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's essentially a protein that's associated with cognitive improvement and the alleviation of depression and anxiety. Now, both BDNF and noradrenaline or adrenaline are released, both of which together help us do away with the stuff that's bothering us and focus on the task at hand. It's also part of the reason, or BDNF rather, is part of the reason why we feel a little bit better after going for a walk, because it actually acts as a mental reset switch. Those of you on the YouTube can actually see a brain scan that was performed by researchers at the University of Illinois on the screen that shows how the brain essentially lights up after a 20-minute walk. Now, a 2014 study found that you don't need to smash yourself in the gym to enjoy that increase in BDNF. In fact, a 20-minute walk or 20 minutes of aerobic exercise at just 40% of your maximal power or output increases BDNF levels. So that could be running, walking, cycling, jogging, swimming. They found that 45 minutes 3 times a week for 12 weeks magnifies this increase. So short bursts of movement definitely have an immediate short-term benefit in terms of your emotional well-being and your ability to focus. But if you make that part of your routine several times a week for extended periods of time, you will find your ability to sit still and focus to be much greater than what it was if you were completely sedentary or just working out once in a blue moon, or just going for short, moderate walks once in a blue moon. So that's BDNF and adrenaline, but we want to look at some neurotransmitters as well. So neurotransmitters, think serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, basically these feel-good chemicals that help us essentially feel good, but also seek out rewards and regulate our emotions. So exercise actually reduces the activity of the amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection system. And it restores homeostasis. So all of us have a baseline level of emotional well-being, which is homeostasis. So it doesn't matter whether we win the lottery tomorrow or whether our partner leaves us, those events will initially make us feel really good in the former example and really bad in the latter example. But after a period of days, weeks, months, we will essentially revert back to our baseline level of happiness. And so exercise actually gets us back to that baseline, which is important to remember, particularly if you're feeling down. And people who exercise regularly will know that they tend to feel better after a workout. And a lot of people out there say things like, if I didn't work out, I'd go crazy. And I know in my case, during lockdown back in 2020, we had an extended 6-month lockdown here in Melbourne, Victoria. We had an 8 p.m. curfew. We weren't allowed to spend more than an hour outside of our homes. It was pretty intense. And I think one of the things that really got me through that was just working out every morning in one of my spare bedrooms. That was an absolute joy. Well, it wasn't a joy. It's probably a strong word, but that was one of the highlights of my day. And not only did it provide me with a bit more emotional relief, I think doing that day after day helped me maintain resilience and a sense that I could push through the difficulty. Because if I could just wake up and do that one thing first thing in the morning every single day, despite how difficult and terrible the world was at the time, I knew I'd be okay. So it played a really important role in my sort of getting through that lockdown as best as I could. So we've talked about, these different neurotransmitters, but one thing we haven't touched on is anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid. I had the pleasure of chatting with Jamie Wheel on the Future Squared podcast a few years ago, and he at the time was working for the Flow Genome Project. And one thing he said was, when we talk about runner's high, people often think it's endorphins. But what he said was that it is in fact anandamide, this endocannabinoid. And emerging literature, scientific literature on the topic, seems to back this claim. In fact, a 2018 study on anandamide, which was published in Nature, which is arguably one of the, if not the most well-regarded journals on the planet, actually drew strong comparisons between the behavioral effects of anandamide as well as tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which is the central psychoactive component of marijuana. Hence why we can feel really good after a 5-kilometer or 10-kilometer run. So moving on, what does this mean from the perspective of our work? Well, a meta-analysis published in the National Academic Press found that aerobic exercise, so remember, moderate intensity, longer duration endurance exercise, running, jogging, swimming, cycling, is related to attention, processing speed, and memory. On the YouTube, you'll see a table on the screen, but essentially what it summarizes is the biological and psychological benefits of moving, such as decreasing anxiety, depression, decreasing psychotic behaviors such as hostility, tension, phobias, headaches, and increasing assertiveness, confidence, emotional stability, cognitive functioning, internal locus of control, positive body image, self-control, and sexual satisfaction. We look at some of the biological effects in the brain, which include, as I've said, increased levels of neurotransmitters such as serotonin and beta endorphins, increased cerebral blood flow, so blood flow to the brain, and maximum energy consumption and delivery of oxygen to cerebral tissue. So what kind of exercise should you do? So I've kind of hinted at aerobic exercise, but how much exercise, how long for? When I mentioned BDNF earlier, I said that you didn't really need to work that intensely for that long. Short bursts of exercise do help, and it's no different when it comes to the release of other neurotransmitters when it comes to the release of anandamide. Performing aerobic exercise at 40% of our VO2 max for just 16 minutes has been shown to have positive effects on cognition. So that's a lower range at which studies look at, 16 minutes up to say 45 minutes, but 40% at just 16 minutes has been shown to have positive effects on cognition. And again, we've got a table on the screen, and some of the key things this table looks at is the effects of physical aerobic exercise on cognitive functioning and well-being. Now, some of the major positive effects are enhancing effective mood and emotional states in healthy individuals and improvement in cognitive function. Some of the biological changes we see here are increasing in neuroplasticity phenomena, as well as, well, one of the other benefits is definitely counteracting neurodegeneration. So aerobic exercise has been shown to delay the onset of neurodegeneration. So we're talking Alzheimer's, dementia, particularly as we age. So not only are there short-term benefits insofar as focus and emotional well-being is concerned, but if you can make that part of your routine, well, potentially, hopefully, notwithstanding other factors, you can stay mentally healthier, alert, and well for much longer in your life as well. It's like sometimes you see 105-year-olds who are just sharp. They crack jokes. They're mentally present. Sure, their bodies may not be in the best shape, but they are mentally present, and that's definitely what we want. We don't just want lifespan. We want health span and happiness span as well. So what if you're one of these people who does anaerobic exercise? I mean, I like to do anaerobic exercise 2 or 3 times a week. So we're talking high-intensity interval training, things like maybe CrossFit, whatever's going to get your heart rate up to the higher end of that spectrum of your VO2 max. It tends to be shorter duration, but higher intensity. So maybe 20 to 30 minutes of really high-intensity exercise. We could be talking CrossFit, sprints, and so on. Even martial arts, particularly if it's a high-intensity circuit where you're punching the bag, then skipping, then sparring with someone, like doing that for 30 to 60 minutes is absolutely draining. And I speak from experience there, and we're definitely getting into the anaerobic state there. But it's been found that moderate aerobic exercise is related to increased performance in working memory and cognitive flexibility, whereas high-intensity anaerobic exercise has been found to increase or improve the speed of information processing, which is all about the rate at which we collect, store, and recall information, which obviously helps us in conversations at work day to day, but also helps us when it comes to decision-making at work too. So in the West, we tend to have these cultures where we sit at our desks for 8 hours a day, work out for an hour, and that's it. But from the perspective of focus, we would be not necessarily much better served, but we would be well served to incorporate movement throughout our day. So a 2019 meta-analysis looked at the effects of continuous movement versus that of a single workout. Now, it found that adults are likely to accrue similar health benefits from exercising in a single bout versus accumulating activity from shorter bouts throughout the day. But from the perspective of focus, if we want to tap into the benefits of that BDNF, the anandamide, the adrenaline throughout our day, we would be better served to actually get up and walk, once every hour for a few minutes, or once every couple of hours for, say, 10 to 15 to 20 minutes. That's just going to help us become much more focused. And it's also just going to improve our emotional well-being, because if you've sat there for 8 hours in a row and barely moved, well, you're going to feel like crap mentally and physically. So ultimately, if you want to avoid that, definitely incorporate movement throughout your day, and you can still do that workout, the longer workout at the gym or wherever it is at the end or before your day. One of the benefits of walking, which I talked about in the previous episode on nutrition, is that it will lower your glycemic response in particular to carbohydrates. So you can avoid those nasty crashes simply by getting up and going for a walk after you consume some carbs or some food in general. Now, when it comes to depression and anxiety, I've touched on it a couple of times in this episode, but working out at, say, 30% of your maximal heart rate has been found to achieve positive mood changes. In particular, anaerobic activity, where rhythmic breathing features prominently. So think yoga, where we're doing this deep rhythmic breathing. That plays a key role also in alleviating depression and anxiety. And I recently got back from a 12-day trip to Byron Bay in northern New South Wales here in Australia, which is a very spiritual town. Lots of surfing and lots of yoga was what the doctor ordered for me, and I definitely felt like a different person every time I emerged from that yoga studio in the morning. Something about deep breathing, and you don't necessarily need to do yoga to tap into the benefits of deep breathing. Obviously, you can meditate, you can just focus on breathing. There are different things you can do. Cold water plunges, where you focus on breathing to kind of regulate your heart rate and stay in there for longer, all play a key role. But definitely, whatever you can do to get into your body as opposed to out of it, because it's so easy in the West to be disconnected from our bodies and just connected to our phones. And that has deleterious downstream effects on so many aspects of our lives. So to bring this episode to a close, movement increases anandamide, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, serotonin, dopamine. It ultimately leaves us thinking sharper and feeling better. So if you are working from home, even if you're not, do what you can to incorporate movement into your day, before work, during work, after work, because ultimately your body, your brain, and by virtue of you performing at a higher, sharper, more focused level, your wallet will all thank you. And with that, we're going to bring this episode of the Workflow Podcast to a close. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever good podcasts are found. And you can find the article that this episode was based on, as well as hundreds of other articles over at steveglaveski.com. Until next time, peace out.